our Executive Commissioner, and Heather Farley, our Senior Director of the EA, here to do today. Let me start by saying to all our here in what I am certain will be a great couple of hours talking about something that clearly is important in our work and affects you all very directly. I'll put this back up at the end if someone didn't get a chance to do it. But I do want to start with some housekeeping items, and part of this is the statement that I'm to read, kind of knowing that this is part of a larger process that's going on right now. So I've got to turn around and read so I can see that. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new formula rather than revising the current formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comments and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. Recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So I have done my disclaimer and will now move on to how we will spend our hours, a couple of hours today. Again, thank you for being here. Incredibly busy time of year. I know it's a lot in the middle of the day to be here, so again, I appreciate your interest. We're going to spend the majority of our time today hearing from you in a couple of different ways on some key areas. Sam's going to give some updates on feedback that we're hearing thus far in the funding discussion, and then we're going to kind of hone in specifically on that local funding and that state and local contribution discussion. We will then allow you an opportunity to work with your teams, and there are lots of folks here today. It may not be that your full team is here, not circle up with someone else. We will have a very targeted discussion, and then you will share that feedback out to the group. And as in our morning session, we were at Johnson City this morning. Lots of great feedback, but a lot of hearing from others, prompting other questions and comments. So I'm looking forward, knowing that this will be a good discussion there. To kick off, though, I think it's important to know who's in the room. I'm going to start over here, and if you can just, someone on your team, say who you are and the team that you've brought, that could be your superintendent or other officials. If you don't mind, maybe start with your table. Thank you for being So I think it's important to know the future and why, because there's a lot of there's this other piece that is a very specific conversation that is involved in all of our work. Our mayors, board chairs, finance, your feedback from this group as we think about this. So I think this is about our. So we were in Jackson on Wednesday. We were in so in all across all of those conversations, I will tell you lots of incredible people, lots of very foundational things that really build and help. And we talking about funding, talking about what happened when they developed a proposal, how that will impact the state and local contribution. So again, this conversation could not happen without you. And so I'm grateful that here today, I will say, this is the first conversation. This is what we see. I'll go home early, that would be great. That is obviously not where we are. This is a very complex body of work. I haven't been happening really. Here we are, and now the time that we have, and that's what we're going to capitalize on. We're going to have a great conversation today. And when we think about the work of the Texas Department of Ed, we talk a lot about making sure every student has access to a high quality education, how it affects college and career ready. All of those things do not happen without the work that you do, without the work that Sam and I get from the department. It's the background, but certainly all of the funding that happens federal, state, and local, that is what makes all the other initiatives possible. So again, my thanks. So again, we're going to start. Sam is going to begin by doing a couple of things. Highlight some of the feedback we are getting thus far in the funding, full funding discussion. Then going to hone in on local funding updates. And again, after that, we will majority of the time do your feedback. But we don't have to hold off the mission.
So, as you said, my name is Sam Kersey. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Operations of the department. Before we get started, I do want to reiterate a thank you to everyone. Semester, for those semesters, trying to wrap everything up in the phone, and just gone home, about all your stuff. I know how much. For local officials, I know that's time commitment on. And this is what I think of representatives to local officials. A lot about their. They've been advocating and they're the right ones to complement that. And to local officials, most things we did in a massive way. I want to acknowledge that because I would also be remiss if I didn't do a special shout out to Karen King back there. She's been a part of these conversations for a long time and has offered me guidance along the way as well. And it's really appreciated. Thank you and thank you. I want to frame up a little bit of what I want to cover in this conversation because there is a lot of the narrative going on across the state about the funding formula, right? Metaphor that lives on and in this case, the building of the pie, right? What goes into that to determine the overall funding that we're for public education? That is the funding formula. That has always been a shared responsibility between state and local like that's true under the B. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the second part of that conversation then comes about state and local contribution. How do we determine once we have the pie, what is the shared fiscal responsibility of the state in making that pie happen? So I'm going to go over a little bit about what's happening on the funding formula side of the conversation. It's really important for everyone to have some grounding and foundation about that side of it. And I'm going to do that thing you're not supposed to do a presentation and ask the local raise the part of it to the local contribution conversation. That's what this group equally brings to the table. So I'll ask your forgiveness in advance when I get to that moment. I will acknowledge it on the front. One other thing that I will say about the funding formula side before I delve into these slides, it is a process in motion. I'm going to share some feedback to date. It's just that, feedback to date. Public comment is still open. 18 subcommittees that are representing different student needs, different lenses on education, different communities are all still ongoing. Conversation is not over on that side either. Don't think any of this is final, just a snapshot of where we stand today. The last thing that I'll say is the framing, and I'll reiterate this again and again. As a little bit of a number cruncher guideline, wanting to approach things logically, there is no way that we can have an engaged, robust, informed conversation about what a state and a local share should be until you have numbers in front of you. So you know how a new formula will play out for your community. And I ask that people commit their communities to a dollar figure that they don't know what that dollar figure looks like. We're not going to ask you to do that today. The questions we are asking today is how do we approach that conversation when and if that moment comes? What do you need to be armed with, still informed and ready to go for that? So I will reiterate that again as we go through, but want to acknowledge that here at the start as well. So what is the conversation around this new funding formula? In general, it's about a shift from a resource-based model to a student-based model. There's been lots of questions about what that means and what that looks like. So let me provide a couple of examples of how that plays out right now in a resource-based model, how that might look different or be framed differently as students. If you think about kindergarten students right now, they generate 20 kindergarten students running around generates the resource that is one teacher. The formula we currently have, a resource-based model, says here's the funding for that one teacher. If you think about special education students in the current formula, students who need speech therapy, option one, generate 1/85th of a teacher, right? And we fund that 1/85th of a teacher for whatever the ratio might be. There's up to 8.5 for our most, right? Which everyone in this room can acknowledge you have needs that are 1-to-1. They kind of feel it's even specialized. So the difference in saying funding that teacher as a resource is saying, hey, what if we looked at the cost of what speech therapy is and funded that, or looked at what could be funded in that as the actual need of the student. So it's bridging the gap between what the funding is and the student and pulling those things closer together. Technology was another example that came up. Right now, the BDP includes a $40 million pot for technology. It is funding the resource that is technology. Instead, you could ask the question, what does it take to support technology for these students? What does it look like? There's not a tech director in the state who has those questions. Thanks for all the one-time relief money. How do I refresh devices when it's all in fun, right? It's on everyone's mind. Everyone's focused on that. So being able to say, what does it look like? Put money into a funding formula that takes care of an individual student's technology needs, not just fund the resource that is technology. This information has been shared previously, but with DC and with the 5-state student hybrid, you've got 39 states in the country who are leveraging some version of a student-based funding formula. That's all to say this isn't a brand new concept, right? What this actually looks like, this is super small, so I will reiterate what you said earlier. We will share this deck out. Again, just wanted to give you a little bit of framework for what this is. There's a space allocation, that bottom pyramid, that goes to every student, regardless of any unique characteristics about them, no matter where they live, no matter what needs they might success. one base for everyone. That second level, and that should capture what it takes to fund businesses for education. The weight section, second tier on the pyramid, captures those unique needs, right? So special education is a popular one. We'll go over some other examples in a minute. But what other student attributes or unique characteristics about the environment may warrant consideration for additional funding? That third tier is direct funding. So these are dollars that are targeted to specific programs. Think about your AP classes or your dual credits funding or your AP research. You can match the dollar need to an exact student, direct funding. And then outcomes based up at the top, right? What does it look like to incentivize outcomes? When those happen, reward district for that behavior. These four bullets at the bottom are what I want to spend some time sharing out a little bit more in depth. This is what we have heard from the public comment, from the subcommittee so far, just kind of all mushed together, and so we'll go back through some. First, districts should not receive less state funding than they're receiving the current fee. Need more money in it. Loud and clear resonated, and it's not a new case, right? That's been around. We know that is the top priority. Number two up there, maintain flexibility for local district budgeting. For those of you familiar with the DEP formula, you will have heard it said it is a funding formula, not a spending formula. No one's talking about removing that flexibility. It's about getting the dollars into local hands to make the best decisions. Third, ensure that whatever is currently funded outside of the DEP is included in the new formula. So I've got a few different points I want to hit on this. The state dollars, not federal grants, but state funded grants. There are a number of them that currently exist outside of the state funding formula. Things like coordinated school health, school safety, things that are widespread across the state. What this is proposing is to say, instead of having districts, and I'll look to our finance directors in the room, fill out another application, another budget, another plan, and then have to report reimbursements on it and follow up through our secret and for every one of those, move those dollars into the funding point. Here's what that would create. One, still have all the requirements that go along with school, right? It didn't make it disappear that you needed to develop an emergency operations plan or have drill logs for any of those funds. But what it did do is take those dollars and put them into a flexible pot that says you as the district still have to meet those requirements that are spelled out in law, but you decide how best to do it, and it removes an administrative task on top of it. I'm going to go ahead and nip one thing in the bud that we've heard a little bit too. This is not about baby schools. Be complete transparency about anything that moves into the funding point. Right? There have been concerns that we're going to move school safety in, say that we increase funding and call it a win. That is not the intent there at all. The intent is to do things where they align. And they can push out and focus more of your energy on how to use dollars. The last one up here is one we're going to delve into a little bit more, and that's that the local match component should be stable, what it would be under the DEP for 3 to 5 years. So I said at the beginning here that as local leaders, you cannot take commitments without knowing what dollars they do. We don't have that number for you today. I know there have been a lot of questions, a lot of flags out there that the state really has a plan already in their back pocket. As the guy who has the task of implementing whatever it is ultimately determined, I promise I do not have a formula sitting on my laptop right now. It's not ready, it's not there because it's really being built from the. What I would also say about this part is that we need to take the time to get this piece settled. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Let me give you a little bit more context on some specifics that we've heard from public comment and the subcommittees around what types of things are heavy in conversation through the different levels of that funding. In the base, those of you, again, who have followed the DEP review committee's write-ups for years now, these are the topics that are continuing to come up, and understandably so, they're there again. Thursday, in one in every school, are at least meeting the national recommended ratio. Counselors, school psychologists, their salary and benefits remain important topics for principal at every school. And Knox-Guy, close to my heart, flexibility for facility funding, or the part making. You all know this, we have a lot of aging buildings. It takes a lot to keep them up and ready for this. To recognize that as part of the fundamental base that is necessary to support them. Weights, things that we are hearing most frequently, some usual suspects up here and some new things that we did. Economically disadvantaged has been always up there, but concentration of poverty has been new. It's not just thinking about your families who may qualify for direct certification through SNAP or Canada, but also thinking about what is that multiplier effect that happens in school. And a lot of those things are thinking about the difference between your Title I school and non-Title I. Kids with disabilities, English learners, rural and sparsity. Rural we knew would come up. That one has been a popular topic as well. Sparsity was new. Thinking about the difference between a rural community that are huddled close together versus one whose school buildings are spread out by 60 miles. That's a very different transportation policy. Fast growing and charter enrollment continue to be topics as well. Down here at the bottom, there's a slide about the things we thought we would hear more, but have not yet. And I'll reiterate the conversation so far from over, but just putting this out. We've not heard much about gifted students, which is like awesome one. All LEA size, specifically thinking through the complexities of establishing economies of scale for smaller LEAs. To class size weight. I mean, I think we've heard this a couple of sessions about the experience with our early learners right now, that having missed school due to the pandemic or not started at the same time, or maybe not have had a pre-K experience with others, there's been a core missing with developmental support that is making this work very, very different than it ever has been. Additional dollars, but thinking about direct funding opportunities that positive feedback. Financial literacy, middle school fees. Those of you who work with our federal purchase grant, you'll know that it recently was also extended down to cover some middle school grades. What might it look like to have some state support in that area as well. Innovative high school models, which is a grant program ran by the state with our federal relief money. But it was immensely popular, so thinking about how do we sustain that program ongoing. And it's school year, more of the conversation about the theme to focus on the summer program, what that might look like to sustain or to target it. RTI, this used to be a popular topic, it's been flagged by the DEP as well. Our formula looks at that from a district plan, other than what it might look like to be basic program. High dosage. Outcomes have received a lot of positive feedback. Early post-secondary opportunities, AP course completion, industry search, work-based learning. So you see the trend there. A lot of focus on what happens from post-secondary readiness and workforce readiness. But we've also heard a lot of conversations going around about closing the gap with customers. What's been part of the conversation. So again, this is far from over. I just want to acknowledge that this is a snapshot that I want you all to have in the back of your mind. This is what it looks like. This is what people are talking about with this. Now I'm going to do that thing where I can try to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit into the current funding formula, the basic education program, the DEP, but quickly pull us over to where and how the state versus local share is currently operating and where that draws us to our conversation. DEP, our basic education program, really has basic in the name, provides a basic level of funding for education. It includes 47 different components across 4 major categories. Pause for just a second on this. We've had some questions and I want to acknowledge it. Right? 47 components sounds like it would be a really, really complex program. Right? And there is complexity to it, but it's also because education and finance are complex topics. Doing something different with the formula is not about simplifying things in a way that eliminates trying to capture what really is going on. It's not about. So I want to acknowledge that. That sounds like a hefty number. There are parts that feel complex, but it's not just about trying to change that number. What I can tell you is that for those of you who have stood up in front of stakeholders and parents, try to explain to you that is a challenging thing to do. And that's challenging in education finance in general, but I want to acknowledge that. When we think about how state and locals share the cost, there's a few things that I want to make sure I just address on the front. There's a line that gets said a lot that the BDC is not fully funded. I want to address it. The BDC is fully funded. It has to be by law. We would be in violation of the law if it wasn't, right? What I think people are really trying to communicate is one of two things. We have concerns that it doesn't cover the full cost of education that happens in our community, and/or we don't necessarily agree with the cost split that is funded by the state versus local. It's that latter question we're trying to get into, right? Because the first building the formula, like to get at that, is it enough? Is it the right level? Is the right money going in the right places? This conversation is about that sharing. But I just want to acknowledge that on the front end. When people say the line, the state doesn't fully fund the DEP. It absolutely funds its share of the DEP. DEP itself is still a cost sharing model, always has. Ratios have changed over time a little bit, but it's always been a cost sharing model. So I just want to make that. Let's talk about how that plays out in the DEP framework. Across the four major categories, each of them start with a basic split. Right, so our instructional component, for example, starts with a split of 70-30. 70% state funds, 30%. That's where we start. That amount is then adjusted further to account for local fiscal capacity. Talk about fiscal capacity in a moment. But at a high level, it's trying to say that if the county has a higher ability to pay, and I'm using my word of ability very carefully, has a higher ability to pay, then the state portion is going to get adjusted down, the local portion is going to go up. So instead of that 70-30 split, you may see 65% state, 35% local. For counties who have a lower ability to pay, the inverse happens. State portion goes up, state covers 75%, the local covers 25%. That's what's happening in that fiscal capacity adjustment. You all know this part well, actually. Probably one of the most basic bullets I could put up in front of people who live and breathe this every day. But the local source majority of property taxes, and then each of your counties will have different implications for the other optional taxes. Fiscal capacity. I do want to spend just a moment on that, because it is kind of the important variable that happens in this cost sharing conversation. Again, lots of financial modeling underneath it, but at a top line level, it is an attempt to capture the ability of the county to raise local taxes. Second bullet is an important thing to grasp. It's not based on what is actually raised. It's not based on what is actually raised. So if you have your property assessment comes in and the value has gone up, that's wonderful. That is what is considered in fiscal capacity. Not whether or not you came back and actually raised taxes before. Maybe where that's at currently. The formula is to determine each county's ability based on average rates across the state, relative measure. And it's determined at the county level, not the individual district level. For those of you who have multi-system counties, whether that's special school districts, city school districts, whatever it may be, this indicator of fiscal capacity comes to us from the county level. The last thing that I'll say under the DEP is that it uses a combination of two different fiscal capacity calculations. In addition, that the state DEP uses back. There's one from TASER, which is the state entity, and a second from SPEAKER, state hearing DEP Knoxville, and those two are combined, trying to get two different expert lenses on fiscal capacity. That's what goes in. The result of that. This is what your finance people are living and breathing every day when it comes to the big numbers around education for your team. The first number that you get is the required local match. Just the result of that formula we just talked about. Whether it's that 70-30 split or one of the other component values. Take that, you add in your fiscal capacity and adjust for it, and the result is here's the amount of money the state's going to put in, here's the amount that the local is required to put in. That is your local requirement. The other number that is very important in this conversation is totally different part of state law. But you all will be familiar with it. Or you have your finances. This is your maintenance of effort requirement. So in general, this says that counties are required to put in as much in their education system this year as they did last year. That holds true each year. Exceptions for one-time expenditure, things like that, but that is what the maintenance of effort requirement has. That's the there, you have to find it. But these are the two numbers that you all have to grapple with each year. For a lot of you, your county may put in more public education than is required at the point. And in some cases, a lot more than what is required. For other counties, it's right at the local match. Maintenance of effort and the local required match are right here. For any number of very valid reasons, right? I just want to acknowledge. These are the two numbers that you're grappling with each year when we look at how they put that in. Where does all this go? This is tying it all together. Again, I've said this before, but there's no way to say, I know my community can commit to X number of dollars in the match before I know what that dollar figure is. We can have conversations at a theoretical level about what might feel fair, but you live in a reality where you have to write it out a real number. So we recognize that. This is based on the feedback where we want to start the conversation from a proposed. Let's break this apart. There is urgency to get more money in. There is political appetite at the state level to tackle this problem, right? And there's a financial opportunity in the state budget to tackle this problem. We'll all deal with local budgeting. This is an observation. If that money doesn't get to education, it could very well go someplace else. I just want to name that lane. This is that kind of perfect storm of an opportunity to push to get more money per day. So we have to move on that side. On the local versus state share side, we're proposing that we start with having a year to dig in deeper to that. Part of the point that when and if a new formula is passed by the General Assembly, today, let's take 1 year to delve into these conversations. Analyze how it played out for your community. How much more money did you get? What is it? How do we reconcile that? Great feedback earlier. Covered grants that might move in. For those of you who know that some of them require a match outside of the formula. Others do not. We move things into the formula that didn't require a match previously. They go into the formula and then generate. It absolutely warrants having a conversation about what adjustments should happen. But that's what we're talking about. Starting with a proposal to say, let's move on to funding formula, building up the pot. There's the perfect storm and opportunity to move on it. But let's write into whatever that bill says that we're going to take a year to make this decision about how that. The other thing here is that you don't magically at the drop of a hat have a decision and then they can execute it at the local level. You need time to ramp up. That's the second part of this proposal. Let's look at taking essentially the 5-year window and in the first year say, we'll convene the group, we'll have all the experts, we'll learn what we need to learn so everyone feels comfortable knowing what Catherine and Seabird do in their formulas, what's good about it, what's going to be better about it, all the things. And then let's take the next potentially up to 4 years to actually implement that new sharing, that new cost sharing model. What that would translate is an opportunity for districts to see more state money in a new formula. Our local communities wouldn't have to contribute anything more for at least that 5-year period. Just our starting point for purposes. What we feedback on help track. Again, kind of dividing that 5 years where the 1 year, let's arrive at a new approach or the same. A lot of work went into the original. Nothing to say that it wouldn't be played in that same spot. And then take a 4-year period to hit that implementation time. That gives you chances to say, even if there's no net change to the dollars of what my sharing may look like, I know from a budgeting perspective it looks different. How do I account for that? Or whatever other changes may come from. So this is where we're starting. And what we're going to pivot to in a moment is the discussion that we will come back up and tell us. Here's what I would encourage you guys to push on. We want your feedback on the funding formula, the building of the fund. More, the better. The public comment is open, the steering committees are open, every single comment is coded and sent to the subcommittee, posted on our website. We're absolutely hearing feedback. But the reason you all are convening in this room is because you represent the group who touch this local contribution. You all have to grapple with that at the local level and say, how is that going to play out for our findings? So as we get into these discussions, my encouragement to you is to try to focus this time on that part of the conversation. Sorry, if you want to share feedback on the broader thing, we're here for that too. But you all represent a unique group of stakeholders. Before I hand it off, questions, I will just disclaim that questions or ideas feel like it would be better for some discussion questions on the applicant. We'll figure out part of that. Any questions I can answer in general? Yes, sir. The way the structure is set up right now, steering committee recommendations up to, sorry, the subcommittee. Steering committee. So there's that's where
So I thought that was an important component to have. So, but as we're kind of delving into the political happening in that development part of this. So, one of the things that I would like for us, and Sam said it himself, is if we 12 months to get this thoughtful discussion, we get the information, when we get the number, come back to you and we're and we look at models and all the models and information. What we are asking from you today is, and again, we have large districts, size districts, small districts represented about what other information, other than the amount, because we that as well. Outside of that, whatever information you need to engage your stakeholders in those follow-up conversations. Take this longer period of time to do as well. And I kind of it's on this slide, and I'll also preview. So as a leader, what are those three that you absolutely have to have? And what are those? So when we go back and we're preparing for our next round of conversations, we come to the what you need. We're not wasting your time. We're giving you structured in a way that's helpful based on your needs. What are those three? The second thing would be, what are the data points that might be helpful for you to feel like you have what you need? Is that some kind of comparison to the current model, compared to a proposed model? Involve with other comparable states? Does it involve a statewide kind of snapshot? Is it local tax information? Is it the history of the state and local share and what's happening? Think about what data you would need to be able to engage in this conversation as we get geared up for what we expect will happen right now. Right now, the subcommittees are very frequently. All of them are doing the work. They are going to work through December, early January. We expect that some type of proposal will likely make it to the steering committee by late January, mid-late January. So knowing that that is ongoing in a very regularly engaged way, we want to make sure that as they get to that phase, we stand ready with some of these information. The last thing I would ask is that you think about what are those topics? Are there topics that you're like, you know what, we need to norm on what exactly when, what is that focused on? How does that differ from tackling? Are there differences? Right now, it's 50-50. Hasn't always been 50. But looking at what other information, and I think that was but if there are other things that you feel like would be helpful for us to provide experts on, information on, whatever that might be, we want to make sure that we are doing our part to have an informed, ongoing discussion. That's the one piece of this that you know, when we talk about slowing this part down, knowing that every tax structure, every county, every community is so very different in how they're established, where they draw their revenue from, have will tax, or do not, like, what are those things that are nuanced for you? And that is kind of the other thing I'll kind of get for if we have time to get to that second question. Are there other things that you feel like have to be? I'll pull one from the last session. Someone said there has to be some type of cost of living piece built in. I'll use that as an example. But if there are other considerations that you all can think of in your context that we would want to surface, we want you to share that as well. So 3 things that primarily, like, what are those 3 things you need to know? What data would be helpful to have at your fingertips? And a follow-up meeting for us to start that deeper dive. And what are those topics that we might need to provide more kind of foundational information? And then finally, if you have any of those special considerations to think about, start thinking those as well. So this is how we'll do this. You can work within your tables and your team. If you're one person or 2 people, you want to circle up with another, I think that would be great. Sometimes it's best if you're the challenges of others. This will be about 20-25 minutes. I'll just watch the room conversation. Sam and I will be kind of working around. Then we're going to share out because, like I said, this is the biggest group we've had. I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to be information for you. So we'll share some time to do that. But any questions about what's asked is that well, I'm really talking about it. Make sure it is.
Okay, so it's 1:45. Give me a 5.
All right, everybody. Appreciate the discussion. I was able to come around to a few things I saw Sam doing the same. I'm going to, we're gonna now just begin to clear out what we will clear for around the room. Everything that you. I want you to figure those things out. And we're gonna do this, I'm gonna hear all the room, everything in your conversation. We're gonna start with the first.
Things. Things we come up with. A lot of people, I don't. As we should be. County system. Here, revenue. Second thing we come up with is actual cost. We report data to the state basis, that one of the costs. Rather, for example, Roane County, local matches got to put in about 7 million more operators. The last thing was a couple questions. How's the cost of living, annual cost of living going to be addressed? And then that's going to be addressed in the form.
So, one of the things that is building into the formula itself, the cost of living. I know there is some inflation and adjustment in there currently, but if that's not meeting your needs, thinking about what that could and should look like from a cost of living. I do see the teacher salaries and benefits in the phase and whether that, that gets increased, knowing how many teachers we need, and how many teachers are coming into the pipeline, and certainly need those considerations front of mind in this discussion. Appreciate that very much. Bring to the ladies. Stand up for the rest of your group. I think those are really valid points. They are very consistent with what we're hearing. Knowing that I'm just having this conversation, whether you have 200 kids, 400 kids in a building, there are operational costs that are, that happen regardless of that. And of course, we've heard principals. I would say the one thing I've heard there is one that, knowing that that is a piece that you're hearing pretty consistent as well, as the principal there. And of course, the pie needs to be larger, certainly. I will say that it isn't, yes, we're moving to a student-based model, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking at what is currently in the BEP to help us ensure that what we are putting in this new formula is meeting the needs. So I appreciate you flagging that, but it's not as if we're not looking at what we're currently funding within the BEP and outside the BEP, but that is definitely something that is helping to inform how we're moving forward. Appreciate that. Okay, fine.
My question. What's the primary objective here? And secondly, what is housing problems?
Okay. So, well, one of the things that we know is that we have struggled in the past to say that haven't put enough in education. And as Sam pointed out, I think there's an opportunity to capitalize on that now and really think about what we say. I can say, think about my own kids and what their education was like a decade ago, how different it is now, not to mention 30 years ago. I was in school. And making sure that, we're developing a model that is for our students right now. We certainly know that this is going to yield more money, but it's also one that is intended to address some of the other needs that we have that maybe weren't considered when this was first drafted. I think about much of the feedback I've heard around nurses and behaviors and counselors, social workers, all of those pieces I don't know that anyone in the room could say is not needed, as we are bringing kids back into classrooms, as we are, resetting our expectations for what it means to be successful in the world we live in right now. But it truly is about giving more money to kids and ensuring that we can continue to help students be college and career ready. That is the purpose. Anything else from your group?
I'll be brief. Thanks again for joining our table. We had a great conversation, great listener. So our three things, my three things I picked up. A conversation around maintenance of community, all communities different, but we have a lot of federal dollars that come in and out that fluctuate. Question, I had a question about will the funds follow the student? In the other states, there are a lot of these models, so that's what happens. So many of these other states, not that we're asking for that, but maybe the school board have taxing authority states. What thoughts are happening?
I will take that feedback, and we will, I think there's a couple of things. I'll just flag one thing, because it actually came up in the table in the back. It's been said a lot that the money follows the student. Right, like you move district to district, that money, that county that's providing the service, that should be true. The places that I've heard that being challenging is the county city where you might have open enrollment, and maybe there's like, I've even heard it said, we just haven't, it's not that many. But there is absolutely, and I see it more on the federal dollars than I do on the state dollars because of the way the ADM would work. But it's certainly something worth flagging. Appreciate the conversation, and I think we can certainly talk about the maintenance of effort piece as well.
As a funder, one thing I think they brought up is the amount of capital investment, that's off the books with respect to maintenance and effort. And that being considered in some of that calculation. Plus $1 million roof is
Exactly.
very expensive.
And I think, some of the conversations, one of the key things is the education system. I'm driving people up to the school at 90 years old. And when you think about not having the ability to do that, thinking about a new funding formula that puts more money in the base, perhaps the money you're spending on nurses and social workers could be repurposed for deferred maintenance, for new construction, things of that nature. So I appreciate that flag on the capital investment being part of that conversation. Anything else?
It's for Glen City Schools, cost differential factor, you have that's their index, just the capacity, the opposite of that is cost factor. Down.
Noted.
One of them.
Yes.
Outcomes, it appeared that they were targeted towards high school.
Yes.
So we're curious, is there elementary inputs or outcomes?
I was actually thinking the same, and when I saw that list of like what would make sense for an outcome metric for an elementary school, and certainly would welcome your input and feedback on what those could and should be.
And, to part B, we left maybe three. So part B would be, what about the opposite of outcomes of work? Are there any penalties?
Yeah, I haven't heard penalties mentioned. I think what we're trying to do is incentivize things that have shown outcomes and good for students. So, but I haven't heard that, but I will like that. I've heard
Money to support infrastructure, facilities, that correlates to the programs that are required by the state. they all require Quidditch. That's somewhat in the current category, but times have changed.
Now, that's super helpful, especially when we think about, if you talk about yeah, that, program, offices, all that. Yeah. So when we say that there's an opportunity at that moment, those are recurring funds. That somebody who's been doing federal for the department, I know that when all the dollars dry up here very soon, there is going to be a moment that we're going to have to address what it looks like post-ESSER. They have referenced innovative high school, that's something that started under ESSER, but like it also, a new model could potentially allow us to continue some of the things that were started and effective under the old model. It is certainly recurring funding, or I think your comment on the aggregation of all of this is a little bit of what Sam was referencing on all of those pieces that are funded outside the when you put them all into one pot, how that's going to, and I think that will be something that we will likely, when we go back and kind of debrief and we think about what needs to happen in the follow-up, we kind of like that and say, here's all of the things, how it was, and here's how it was actually given. I think that's a very exciting thing.
How do you apply that one? But if there's the other issue or question we had was that there was ability of local budget to harmless. That means that at the end of our many years, our money goes way up. You explain what that exactly means.
I will be noted about the larger pie. I think that is the assumption, that's the baseline assumption we're all working toward from, is to say, the whole point here is to put more money in, and then figure out how to slice it. But certainly, absolutely. As it relates to, the second one, trying to around.
You're right. So there's one of the bullet points on the feedback, and it spoke of the 3 to 5 years it sounded like a whole harmless provision, which would at least imply or tacit acknowledgement that there's the potential that local funding bodies will be required to put more money in.
So here's how that will work. My understanding is that if we move forward with this 1 year of planning and then a 4-year on-ramp, I wouldn't call it a whole month, I probably would call it like a whole constant, so that for the next 5 years, you would not have to contribute any more than you are contributing today. Okay, so that gives time for a number of things. Gives you time to kind of look at what you want, you can keep the fund at this level and the state up this increase. Clearly, the state would have to make up that difference for that period of 5 years. If you are above the required minimum, it may not be that you still have to change it after that 5-year period.
That's helpful.
If you are at the minimum, are the ones to worry about, because they're right there at the minimum, and those are the things that when we talk about physical capacity, we'll have to do kind of tease out.
So it's more about Okay, so rather than an actual dollars, it's the required minimum if you are significant.
You have to maintain your current. That is.
Granted, what we were concerned about is that it's because the implication that there would be a requirement that the local funding body would have based on it.
Again, so long as you're above.
Got it. Perfect.
But in the 5 years, we have to put it more on.
So potentially it's agreed, and that's only is because I would say that have from county up here at 7 million above the minimum. So likely they could choose to stay at that level.
That's the question, but I think that would be a key thing.
Agreed.
City managers, county managers, no, that's the issue about that.
Yeah, potentially something out there, especially knowing that, you have other things that you're trying to do. I would also say, as I said just a moment ago, depending on what ends up in the formula, it could very well be that the nurses, extra nurses, folks that are actually part of the base, that gives you all flexibility, that money will, again, something that like the first. But yes, I will be honest, that at the end of that 5 years, if you are at the required minimum, there's a world, of course, and it will play out when we talk about the physical capacity of the split. But there is a world where that is likely when the state goes up and you're at the minimum, that you have to get your.
I think somebody won't know it.
Sure.
Sometimes if you run a box, say, well, it looks like it was maybe this much. I think that's what somebody want to know.
I could not agree more, and I think once we get those numbers, we will certainly, I think, take a look at it and slice it out a different way, exactly what you said.
First, if there's enough new money to do a new formula, it makes sense. I might say over here, I like the increasing, but if we're gonna put it on, it makes sense to do it right time, to look at the formula. I think the four components would be added or increased. We really need to know that. The other thing to me is, the base seems to be terribly important. Range that base makes a big difference. 5,000, 7,000, 8,000, or you want to. I really like the idea of rolling in the supplemental program. It's a lot of work. Concern there would be sure, some of the supplemental programs are on a single basis, some of the dollar amount, it goes to be bigger, it will be equalized. But you actually can lose money, so there's got to be a way to roll it in that thing that includes the physical capacity model. Says, okay, I'll get this, and I'll get equalized now. Money could go up with that. And again, law ways, I think, the argument will always be over the physical capacity model. We all agree that the gentleman always said that if there's no money, we're all gonna lie. Nobody's losing money. I'm gonna like the model because that's the most money. I think they're looking for it. We're gonna look at 4 or 5 models. When I do, I'm gonna pick out one that's best for me. Physical capacity model can be also change forms, change in action, additional money. I think that's the thing I want to support of you. Funding form based on new money. These things here, but I don't know those. I could actually think I'm getting. I'm not saying it be true. I'm saying everybody needs to be assured. Oh yeah, this really does this to my future. Not be surprised by some equalization thing, but that will be on.
Really helpful, and I think, part of what you said triggered something for me to agree, and that is to think about being really transparent about what all is included in the base. I also think that, and, there's going to have to be an analysis of the described, to demonstrate if they all get rolled in, are you still ultimately, when they're teased out, you can say exactly when they get rolled in. I think that's a very valid point.
Get really excited about the right things, more funding for nurses, more funding for technology, more
heard that for years.
Well, and this is what I would say to that, like making sure if you've not talked to folks on the subcommittee, they're the ones who are making these determinations when you think about some of those, groups. All that information is on our website, but you, and many of you are on subcommittee. So thinking about, maybe, if you've not made a comment, if you've not reached out to folks, I would strongly encourage you to do so, especially the things, that you feel your district or your situation that you promise.
One other comment,
Yes, sir.
even if they put it under the million, it'll still be limited, still may have to take the chief.
Sure.
I hope it's unlimited money to get everybody.
No, I would love that too,
But
but.
the odds are, I have to back in some of those figures here, twist one, or how much.
And that's part of the other piece that we're trying to hold tight to is the flexibility at the local level to make those determinations. Certainly that we want as much as we can grab as for kids. And but also knowing that what is the priority in Athens to be made, it's a little different than maybe the priority is not for grading or whatever. So making sure that we're that flexibility and asking for as much as we can get for kids. But knowing that, like your own spectrum, from us, we have to make sure that we're, making it.
And I hate to keep talking, but when do you think we'll know how many new dollars you're talking about? I mean, we hear rumors everywhere, but I mean,
Again, if things stay on track, I would say, maybe January, perhaps. We probably have a little more information about that. I hope that's not cringing behind me there. But,
at least we're not, it'll be great.
yeah, and I think that's what's gonna kind of fuel this next level of conversation, because all of this is actually, I get really excited to think about, like, how do we prep to bring back this information, we did do such a thing that you already tried, so really appreciate that, the comments.
They're in the building every Tuesday. We're about to be, we are all now making full service. A lot.
Fantastic feedback, I appreciate it. The other thing, think about the critical reports that interview. See all of the statistics from the pandemic, and you hear that the one statistic that's gone down is the number of like allergy cases. Significantly down because people for the mandatory reporters hurt your heart, and I appreciate you flagging that. I don't know that anyone can agree, for that. As well as the Jeff County and the funded mandate, we heard that in some of the other conversations. Specifically, one of the things that. Other things, and those have not already been talked about, people are very curious on what the state plan is gonna look like. So that's gonna help us to decide what we need to do, because we don't know what it looks like, and we can't plan. And also, who is going to determine what the local should pay?
And it's global, you'll push the formula, or who determines that, on the local map. With that formula, and I think that looks like. And then also, the last thing, and I think they just touched on that, is, if the state's gonna mandate it, they need funding. Because you're paying a lot of their local money into things that are mandated that are not funded by the state. So that would really help us out. That goes back to the top, our assistant principals, our nurses, counselors, DAs for one-on-one, for special ed kids, and different things that's not funded, but it's there. That comes out of our budget. Major concern about the local map, we are a very rural district, and
Appreciate that feedback, and I think that we get into that, and I'm sure you. Conversation around system capacity. And that is my law firm. I kind of move back around to the. Here, in thousands of units, probably that is all. I've been working on this. And I had additional thoughts. Also, everyone. I also wanted to be excited. And wow. The hospital. Very slowly. I didn't mandate the national, I did the national, by the time we started. That's how I'm that. I'm going to talk to the guys who know. That's 5 years. As local, county commission. And here we are. And as we find out after budget. This is good. Also, that's the president. That's the like 12 days. Where don't want to have a drain. It's changing. Everyone. That's not the outline. And not, and there's the training paths. And the perceptions. Sometimes. Platform on my website. Now, a lot of folks that talk about also did. That's one of the. Somehow or another, whatever it is. Thank you for all of your feedback. That really are kind of have to be tackled as we don't. The other item, I'd like to lose what's going to be all of us. I do like the local. I want to. With the days meeting, I would like to see their first. I had some kind of why I did that because without it for you, why do you need it now? And so that's, and I don't mean that critical, it's just I'd like for everyone to be educated on and because they're starting to speak about and our employees on to the first last couple of weeks. It's been really hard, and I'd like to know what's going to be that base model that's going to address that common one. Thank you. I think we're all feeling that as well, and I'm hearing every one of these visits that we've done and meetings, but also I also had a number of visual different, and I haven't come up there.
And I guess one way. At the bottom of that page, right?
To be determined. I think one of the big things here is, sorry, that's to be determined. One of the big things that I want to emphasize is that the future state of what the cost sharing is, that's what we're talking about taking a year to determine. So I think those are the right conversations to have.
I heard that, all of the bank, that's good clarification. And I think the local flexibility is great, we have less local flexibility today than we did last year, every year less, and I imagine, you know, a big pot of money is not into the huge formula. Some legislators won't like how local directors boards allocated those funds that usually not able to collect the nurses. So here they start imagining local follow will be rules about how we get started. And I think that's the I have, it's a fear I have today, regardless of the
flag, sitting there, especially on the
Just a couple of comments. I don't want to be cruel, but I would like for the state to acknowledge that no city, county, anybody can run only have teachers outside of the league. And it was said at one of our state meetings that our legislature said, well, if you're running a system and have more teachers than the league, that's your problem. You should be doing a better job. And if that's for that's not a good thing. The other thing is, local funding bodies did cuts in the government. They did, I think 9 years ago. A lot of us still trying to get it. A lot of things that they're giving back to us. That's kind of my comment. The other thing I'd like to know is, when we do this funding, are we going to stay with, ADM, or we going to do the 60? Are we going to do prior year, or is it going to be tomorrow I lose 20 students, I lose funding today? How does that work? That's really one of the says that student, you know, if you lose 50 students per semester,
I think that's part of the things we will be passing out, but I think those are excellent flags, especially about, again, for them and encouraging prior years that.
and the last thing I would say is, I hope when the state sits down that Mary and Durski can do it.
I can assure you.
I'll
I'll tell you what, I know Sam.
Been on the phone all the drives.
Feel strange talking to them. Certainly, I never teach about education at this table. I'm a clerk by secretary. We talked about the time limits, about how sometimes we struggle with practice, but I have to be passed on to one first, we're still. Talk about how they explain. I mean, leaders like mayors, commissioners, people that are voting on this funding, but then have to. We do like to be. Custodians are one of the things we talked about, how much more work they come in the last year. We are next to the hospital. And flexibility, we also think that our school district may be paying money one year and more security the next year. That's always going to be different. Just building in some kind of flexibility. And then fiscal capacity is another big one. I think that probably is important. Good job. And like some really good things, and one of the stuff that you got is around this point, get around having, like, I think about it sometimes when you get a telephone, would you hear what you heard, and then go tell someone else? And I think part of what triggered me when you said that is thinking about what resources should be developed to kind of give that to you to be able to do that. I think that's why on that.
One thing I was thinking on that, from a city finance perspective, I would love to know, when you were talking about data points that may be helpful, assets compared to. Because assets might, better show like how many facilities they have to maintain, better than just the student population.
It's low level here, so I can probably,
Most everything, already been hit. We had a couple of things, the base, Green and others have talked about, it's kind of hard to go back to basic funding bodies. Explain what's going on, so we at least understand where we are. Hard to ask a detailed question, because there are 47 items in the calculation on 100, just understand kind of where we are. Elected meetings, I only got 2 more weeks, and I'm retiring. But there's an effort that wants to stay in place. In other words, if we get additional funds, commissioners cut their local fund. And, action report, and they cut, which this is just kind of my thing. The state dictates elected official pay each year, and they give raises for certified people. We have a whole lot more employees in this. They cannot leave those speed route. Don't give raises.
Thank you for that, feedback, I've heard a lot about how some of the non-profit positions are that have become so critical in doing that, did I miss anyone? Did I miss any group? I want to say a couple of things, but as we kind of get close to the end of time here, and a couple of the ones that we were talking about those additional considerations, I think you all flagged a number of those. I've already captured those. I would also think as we come back together at a later date in early 2022, thinking about projections for the future. I mean, I know types of things happen now, because the low hanging fruit of the county, and what a difference that is going to make, not just in that county, but in the surrounding areas. So think about growth projections, things like that, as we come back together, continue to think about those types of considerations, inflation, cost of living, et cetera, there. Another thing is, if we're going to invest a year to get this right, what does that year look like? And who's at the table? And what is the structure? Like, part of it feels like level setting on things like the fiscal capacity model. Whereas other feels like more like a work session to take the number, when we get the number, and apply it differently and look at it through, across the state, by the different types of communities, looking at it for districts that have the city system, the special school districts, and really trying to tease apart those components of it. And then, of course, thinking about being accountable and to have some kind of recommendation. As Sam may have, I think you said it, this session, but we proposed for the General Assembly, would have some type of language that details out this year, that language that provides this year to develop it. So at the end, we have to come up with a product to hand as part of that kind of proposal. So thinking about also how we hold ourselves accountable to getting that done. These are the things that we're also continuing to think about, so if you have other feedback, I know the superintendent is figuring out how to get in touch with me, but also feedback on anything around the structure of this larger conversation. The thing I would ask now is to continue these conversations with your stakeholders and use, collect other feedback. You may leave today and say, you know, so-and-so should have. I can't, we really need your her input right now. So part of what the follow-up from this will be, we'll send you the PowerPoint. And there's also going to be a brief question that you say, hey, give it your feedback, you didn't share the reason. That you didn't stand up and share. We'll have that opportunity as well. I can't underscore the importance of direct feedback, because again, I can summarize what we did. I took, lots and lots of notes, but I don't know your local context and what resonates with the committee are your local stories and what makes this an important consideration based on your situation. Say that that will be very impactful in those committees that are the subcommittees that are working on this, and they are working on this now. So I would strongly encourage you, EDQ.funding at PN.gov, that account is monitored daily, it is reviewed, it is list those committees. They have, please take that opportunity, especially have strong comments, things that you haven't shared yet, or want to make sure that you talk about SROs or emergency or whatever it is that you feel strongly about. I want to submit that feedback directly. On behalf of Sam, myself, thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the engagement. The fact that you all are here, the fact that you stayed the whole time, and participated at this level, it demonstrates your commitment to this along with us. And we hope that you stay with us as we continue this. I wish it were easy as a one and done, but certainly it is not. So I welcome your feedback. I look forward to engaging with you. Stay traveling and have a very, very